Hello again. First, I want to say a big welcome to Anyeley, Greg, and Kimberly. So thank you for being here.
Thanks for having us.
Before we jump in, I just want to say also a big thanks again to Ifeanyi for that film. So thank you. I thought maybe we could start with second tier. I thought here on stage with three folks who have some power as developers in this town, and the claim that Portland is a second-tier city. I just wanted to start by asking sort of, maybe we can start, Anyeley, with you. How does that sit with you to hear that?
That's a deep question. It sits very well with me, partly because one of the things I like most and have liked since I moved here 10 years ago is the idea that you can walk into a grocery store and just see three people you know. And I think that connection to community, I grew up in a suburban town in South Florida, and even though it was a lot fewer people, I never did that growing up. So I think that kind of human connection, not only in the neighborhoods, but also in the business sector, make it a very attractive place, obviously, to live and do work.
Mm-hmm.
It's interesting because we might be a second-tier city, but I don't look at us as a first-tier city or a second-tier city. I look at us as Portland being what Portland is. We have a unique identity. So to me, for being what we are, we're a first-tier city. You know, I don't relate to. I learn every time I go to another city. I bring back ideas, but you know, I think Portland's. You know, to me, I call it the country's largest petri dish. You know, it happens organic. When people come in from out of town, I tell them if you go one spot, go to Pal's Books. I can't tell you how it works, but it works. And so I think we need to build on our identity, being what Portland is. There's always something to learn from other cities, but I'm not striving to be Seattle or San Francisco. That's not, I think, our city's
So we'll
goal.
definitely come back to what
Okay.
Portland is for sure, but Kimberly, yeah.
So I think the kind of calling us a second-tier city is important in that I think from a capital markets standpoint, we've become a second-tier city. I think we are going from a third-tier city to a second-tier city. So from my perspective, some of the growing pains that we're collectively experiencing is that change from being a market where you didn't have to invest to being a market that capital wants to invest in. So I do think it's a transformation. I think it's accurate. I don't think we're San Francisco or New York. I don't want to be a San Francisco or New York, but I do think it's meaningful, and I think it describes some of what we're experiencing.
And Anyeley, I guess you talked about sort of being able to run into people when you go out to buy something, which you associated with second tier in a way, like that there's something about the scale.
Yeah.
Does it feel like that scale is changing? That's the first time probably that we've used the word change, but I imagine we're going to keep using that word over the next little bit. Does it feel like we're in a moment of changing in that way? Scale, specifically.
Scale. There's obviously a lot of change going on in development particularly. What I think is important in Oregon and what is attractive about Oregon and Portland is the idea of the urban growth boundary and the idea that we can preserve farmland and forest and also have the city. And so I feel like there's a lot of unutilized space is the way I think of it within the city. And so even though it's changing within there, it's not fundamentally changing in the sense of you see a lot of other cities just sprawling out and changing in that effect. So I see it as a positive thing. Obviously, I'm a real estate developer. But the idea that we are filling in, the city that we already have, and that change, if it's directed in a way that benefits all, can actually be a good thing.
And I just want to quickly follow up because you said you're a real estate developer.
Yeah.
And I read in a not too long ago interview, you said you kind of had to wake up and realize that you'd been reborn as a real estate developer.
Yeah.
And I just wanted to ask, since I think in a way all three of you might fall into that category in some way, maybe, at least represent a development commission. Like, what does it mean? What did it mean to you to go, wait a minute, I'm a real estate developer?
Well, I studied urban planning, and I studied environmental technology, and so I was on a side of anti-development side. You know, I always saw the developer as the evil person. I got into development because I thought it's one of the best ways to actually realize good design, sustainability, and it's because I had clients as developers that didn't have those values that made me want to become a real estate developer. And so I think I was in the field but not really accepting of it in a way until I was in a project in Corvallis that got opposed by the neighborhood association. And suddenly I was the one standing there as the developer with people looking at me such. And I think that was the kind of rebirth I had where I was like, wow, this is really me. And then accepting that and then saying, how can I use that platform for change?
Greg, does the term real estate developer fit?
Well, interestingly enough, we're not developers. We buy, we renovate buildings, but we partner with people like Gerding Eatland if we're going to do a development. But, I love the vision aspect of it. So we try to do, we're pretty fortunate. We have a lot of properties, and, my father basically built the business out. So what we do, we will either do it right or just say we can't afford to do it. And to me, it's really, you kind of, from a development standpoint, you got one shot at it. And I think it's good that we have things like design review, and it's more difficult to get through something. And out-of-town people come in and go, God, this process is hard. Well, it's kind of meant to be hard, because when you build a building, it's going to be there for a long time. As far as development and density, I think it's really, really important with our urban growth boundary and what we've spent. We've spent a very significant amount of money on light rail, billions of dollars, and I think it's important sometimes that we realize what we are in going forward. And I know there's this kind of budding, with the new jobs and people coming to town, but from a state standpoint, we're in an income tax-based state. And if you want good schools and you want good services, you better have jobs or come up with another way to tax people. You need to have a growing economy, which in Oregon's case is jobs, in order to succeed. But you should never take your eye off. You shouldn't just develop something to develop to get jobs. You need to have a high standard, and I think Portland's done a pretty good job of that.
And so economy, it would seem like it falls right into the Portland Development Commission.
Yeah,
so
absolutely. So PDC is the City of Portland's economic development agency and redevelopment agency, and our mission is to create economic growth and opportunity in Portland. So development is a part of that. Supporting businesses is a part of that. Working with communities is an important part of that. And I think the work that we do both help shape the future, but it's also responsive to the present and some of the long-term trends that we see. So, I don't envision the Development Commission as a developer. I think we are and need to be nimble and really respond to what are the most pressing challenges of the day. And yeah.
what feels most challenging to you right now? What are the most pressing challenges?
So I think today the most pressing challenges is probably the way that the city has recovered from the recession, and the fact that you see this significant bifurcation in the economy. So you have, I was looking at this recently, you had about 18% growth in low-wage jobs, so jobs that pay, $20,000, jobs that really, it's hard to make it work in Portland. And then you had about 13% growth in high-wage jobs, so jobs that pay $100,000 a year. You had a 3% increase in middle-income jobs. And the only jobs that actually had a wage increase, or the only people who really benefited from that economic growth, were those people who had graduate school degrees or bachelor's degrees. And then add to that the fact that communities of color before the recession faced disproportionate disadvantages and institutional biases, institutional racism. So I think those are, without question, the biggest challenges that we need to address, and it's going to take all of us to do that.
Can I go back for a minute to Portland as with its particular challenges, but in a way you all seem to resist saying Portland wants to be San Francisco, or Portland ought to think of itself alongside Seattle. I mean, there seems to be a real emphasis on Portland being this own unique kind of place. And I guess I just want to ask, like, what is it? What's unique about it?
Well, I mean, to me, it's that Petri dish deal. It's really hard to put your finger on it. We promote creativity here. We have a fierce pride in who we are, you know, and I just remember years ago when Starbucks cut back a whole bunch of operations, not just in Portland, but around the world, actually. It was probably 8 or 9 years ago. And in Portland, they closed 6 stores, and one of them was on Hawthorne, and one of them was on Division, and those are growing areas that you would have thought they would have stayed there. But people in those areas would drink motor oil before. I mean, and I think Starbucks has a good cup of coffee. That's not my point. But Portlanders will go to Stumptown. Especially in certain neighborhoods, they love their independence, and they root for that, and they want to support it, and it's part of their identity, you know. And I think that, I'm sure people in San Francisco and Seattle say the same thing, but, you know, I've had a lot of friends from out of the state come here, and they're hearing about Portland now. You used to say, well, what do you hear about Portland? 10 years ago, they go, honestly, I know it's between San Francisco and Seattle. Now people are coming out, the restaurant scene and all that. It's not a restaurant scene like everybody else's restaurant scene, you know. It's a different restaurant scene with maximum capacity of 50 people, no reservations, waits, you know. So it's kind of a unique identity, and we're the fair-haired child of the New York Times and so on, so people are intrigued, you know. There's this mystique about it.
So the phrase you used is loaded?
Pardon me?
The phrase you used is a loaded phrase. We are the fair-haired child of the New York Times,
Yeah.
which feels like a remarkably apt phrase.
Yeah, yeah.
So let me ask about that for a minute.
Yeah.
And Kimberly, you're nodding. What are you thinking?
Yeah, I mean, it's, right, fair-haired, connoting blonde, kind of chosen. And I think that there is, right, so I'm not a historian, and so I won't get all the details right, but the history of Oregon and being exclusionary and thinking of ourselves as sort of a white utopia is real. And I think that when we think about what is Portland and what makes us unique, I do think it's been a great scale. I grew up here. I'm really proud of that. I love the city. I grew up not far from here, so I'm not, you know, I'm of here. But I also think there's a stain on our history that's really real that we have to wrestle with.
Anyeley, you're here 10 years or so, if I remember right. Does that stain feel alive, or does it feel like a stain on our history?
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting because, you know, you read statistics about African Americans, especially communities of color in Portland, and versus kind of the people who grew up here and also lower income people, how they don't really have mobility, and the school rates of people dropping out is really bad within that group. And then you read other statistics that talk about African Americans with, you know, higher education or graduate degrees that come from elsewhere find it great and succeed very well. And I guess I'm in that latter group of people who come and say, wow, this is kind of a land of opportunity. I came here without a job, like a lot of other people. And my husband came, you know, with himself to start an office for a company. And, you know, he's since has 50 people, offices in China and New York, and sold his company. And I started, you know, part of a startup of a company too, and now I'm a real estate developer. So I like that was featured in the video, is the idea that you come and you just say, let's do this, and it's very entrepreneurial and kind of pioneering. But that doesn't include everybody in that. And so I think that kind of dichotomy between those two things is one, like you were talking about, what is one of the greatest struggles that Portland will have now, or has been having, is that how does everyone benefit from such an environment? And I think a lot of the things that I say, resonate with the why people don't like the Portlandia sketches is because it's a land of opportunity and it's almost a caricature in some ways for some, but not for others. And I think reflecting that true identity of Portland, I think, is actually a better thing. And there's been efforts to kind of raise the profile, especially of the African American entrepreneurs that are in Portland, and then the communities that have been having businesses and had been thriving in the past to kind of support those and not just kind of maintain a status quo vision of what Portland is.
So how to weigh those kinds of questions about equal access, equal opportunity, let's say, along with development, specifically economic development. I mean, I think that's the core of the question. Like, maybe I should stop there. How do you put those together, especially given your roles and thinking about how you enter into what Portland is becoming?
So I think from the public sector side, I think it's really, well, I guess I would start from the fact that I think we need both growth and increased opportunity. I don't think we get to a better place by just redividing the pie in a more equitable way. I think we get through to a better place by expanding the pie and making sure that the public sector and our policies and our private sector partners are really intentionally considering from the beginning who will benefit, who will bear the burden of these developments, and it's important when you're thinking not just about development, but also about stopping development. So for those folks who are homeowners, for those people who live in really wonderful neighborhoods, the act of saying we don't want growth or we don't want to see expansion and the lack of supply that then can occur is a pretty privileged place to be from. And so I think we need to think about it as growth being part of the solution and harnessing that growth and working with the private sector. I think that's something that I think is really important.
Greg, what do you think about how those two fit, sort of on the yeah?
Rephrase it, or not rephrase, re-ask.
All right, I'll try.
How what two fit?
I'm thinking about, on the one hand, commitment to values like, let's say, equal access to opportunity and economic development. And again, I'm thinking especially about your roles.
Well, okay, so when we do a development, certainly based more on the neighborhood, but like in the West End where we, Girding Eatland developed with us the 12 West building, we went out of our way. Where Tasty and Alder is at the Culver building on 12th and Alder as well. We took local people, okay, as opposed to the big nationals. Where Tasty and Alder is, we had a national bank that wanted that space, and we didn't even entertain it. We took a lot less of a personal guarantee, very little personal guarantee from John Gorham, because we thought we loved curating and cultivating an area. So we try to do it in that regard. At the same time, you have to understand when you do a 12 West, and we've got the local retailers in 12 West too, the Indigo, but at the same time, when you're hiring somebody to do a job, and it's a major investment, you're hiring the best person. I don't know anybody that says, get me this, get me that, whatever. They say, who is the best mechanical engineer? And nobody, and in all candor, I'm not sitting there saying, when they send their proposal in, explain your racial diversity. I'm just being honest with you.
Yeah.
I go for the best person because I've got a lot at stake.
Yeah, and I think that's actually a more specific way to ask the question I was trying to ask, which is what are the values that you're putting into practice with decisions like who do you hire?
I try to hire local. I mean, every time I can, I try to work with a contractor or whoever it is on a local level. My business is very relationship oriented. My family's kind of a handshake family. Do you know what I mean? If you live by your word, obviously you sign a contract when you hire a contractor to build a multi-million-dollar deal, but I always do my best to go local.
So just because there were two kind of throwaway phrases that actually caught me. One was, do you know what I mean? And the other was, you got to understand. And the reason I'm catching on those is because I actually, being outside the world of development, mostly Mostly I don't understand. Mostly I don't get it. It's this confusing world to me, and I don't know how it works. And so I feel like actually I'm glad you all are here, but I'm also psyched to get to hear, in a way, like how does it work? And in a way, what are the values you're weighing against each other as you're making decisions that have implications fairly broadly? And so I don't know if when you think about the values that rise highest to the surface as you're making consequential decisions, what are those values? How do they rush against each other?
Yeah. Everyone likes to think of their company as unique. My company's unique. But our values really stem from design. All three of us business partners are from design backgrounds, so that's pretty high. And sustainability is obviously very high. And so when making decisions regarding that, those go pretty high in our radar. What I think is important with any real estate development, especially in the commercial sector, is the idea is you're only as good as your money. And so who you get your money from to do your projects really influences the way you practice. And so early on in our company, we always talked about, did we really want to take money from that person or that person, because we knew that would change the way that we did. And we're very careful about who our investors are in the sense of understanding what our values are, appreciating them, and kind of letting us run with that. And so I think that translates into a lot of the bad development that you see in the city of Portland, is where their money comes from doesn't value those same things. And for instance, I'm working on this innovative project right now that's trying to be the first skyscraper in the United States made out of wood. And a lot of people say to us, like, how did you start working on that project? Well, it's like, our client is a community bank that all their profits go into the communities that they work in, and it's beneficial state bank, and they value, minority, small businesses, sustainable businesses, and so when your vision comes from that, or your money comes from that, that's how you're gonna operate, and I think that's an important decision factor when you see buildings in Portland that you don't like.
Thoughts in this area?
Yeah, well, when Anyeley was talking, I had a lot of different thoughts. But I do think that this is part of, mentioned earlier, going from a third-tier city to a second-tier city, and what that means from a capital standpoint, and who's looking to place resources. And so from my perspective as an investor and a gap lender within developments, we're looking to see how our resources, which are basically your resources, the public dollars, can increase the public benefits and really help make things that wouldn't otherwise pencil work, so that they act as patient capital. And we have requirements around green building, minority and women contracting, and workforce requirements. But increasingly, we also want to understand the kinds of jobs that are being created, what is the impact to the community, what is, making sure that affordable housing or affordable commercial is baked in long term. And being able to have influence over the capital is critical in order to be able to get those outcomes.
So in a way, thinking back to what we were talking about before, about Portland sort of being itself, like, are those kinds of commitments Portland? In a way, I'm asking, like, what are the deepest values of Portland right now, and where do we draw them from? Do we draw them from what Portland used to be, or do we draw them from some picture of what it might be? And I'm thinking in part of the comment about nostalgia. But where do we draw our sense of...
You can get a little bit lost in nostalgia. I mean, I think nostalgia is great. And, when Earl and the people were thinking, Earl Blumenauer, when they were talking about light rail, and everybody thought they were nuts 35, 40 years ago, and it turned out to be great. That was a major vision. Pioneer Courthouse Square, which, fabulous, our city's living room. That was a 3-2 vote at city council, and so a lot of times vision is controversial. And to me right now, and I think it's changed a little to the positive, but we were on a negative trend that we got away from the vision and we were relying on the past. I think Portland's always been cutting edge, okay? And that means you take some gambles, you know, the light rail instead of the Mount Hood Freeway, Pioneer Courthouse Square, the list goes on. And those are things that have defined our city. And I think we, you know, when you see Kimberly and Anyeley and the young people that are moving here, even though she's from Portland, or middle-aged. No. I'm joking around. I'm 60 yet. So, you know, I think that it's really important for people like myself, I'm about to be 60, that you have to empower the youth, you know, and you have to look and realize that it's not about suits and monogram shirts, and that's not the driver, you know, and so I think we got away from that a little, and I think, frankly, as great as the visionaries were in the 70s, you know, documents are meant to flow. They're meant to evolve, and people sometimes get too hung up on the past, which was great vision at the time. But if you stay hung up on the past, you lose Portland's identity. So you gotta take some chances out there.
So first, I want to note your tactful retreat from that offhand comment about middle age. It was nicely done.
I mean,
but I don't want to lose
a 50-year-old's middle-aged to me, and they're much younger than that. But so.
But I also want to move towards, so in a way, talking about not counting too much on some vision of what the past was, but really thinking about the vision of the future. But I still want to ask, okay, so what guides that? I mean, the nice thing about a vision of what it might be is, as you said, the Petri dish, kind of, you don't know exactly what it's going to be. So it seems more like you're choosing a set of values or a set of things to aspire to. And I guess that's what I want to ask. What then to aspire to if we're not guided primarily by that?
Well, I mean, I was part of the Portland plan process that went on in the city of Portland, and I really liked that process with the amount of engagement that went into it and kind of looking at that overarching values about what we care about in our city, the idea of 24-hour neighborhoods and these kind of general ideas. And I was, you know, a little disappointed that once you start getting down to individual policies, like actually like what are setbacks and stuff like that, everybody forgets these values that were made. And when you start getting into the meat of it, when you're trying to get a building permit done, and somebody wanted me to mention this example, so I was like, I had to mention it. So I'm on the board of the Portland Housing Center, which is one way that I think I contribute back toward thinking about affordable housing for the for sale market. And we have this piece of land that I was going to do townhomes on, and I got the idea, what if I try to do some affordable for sale product, but do in a market rate situation? Can I figure it out as a exercise? But actually I wanted to do it. And I was able to figure it out, and I was able to get 4 units of affordable for sale housing and 10 units of market rate housing. But the zoning code had so many restrictions around it that I realized that it just couldn't be possible. And so then I reported this back. And I think everybody felt really sad with the idea that you try to do something good in this regard, but there's kind of things holding you back from being able to do that. And now I've forgotten the question that I've started. Sorry.
Well, that seems, it's a values.
Right.
I'm asking about values.
Yeah, values.
And vision.
Yeah, so I guess my point was, now that I got it, was that there's all these really great set of values, and in that way, I might be nostalgic toward those values, the values of the urban growth boundary. You know, that's kind of old if you think about it. But the idea that if you have these values, it takes a long time to realize them, and instead of kind of changing those values, why don't we continue to strive to realize them, which I feel is getting lost in when it gets down to the minutia of the actual policy. Nobody's going back and saying, wait a minute, does this make more affordable housing? Does this make 24-hour communities? Nobody's really going back to kind of test and recheck on the values.
Kimberly, does an example pop to mind for you?
Well, I guess what I was thinking of is, so this is not an example, but what occurs to me is a difference between espoused values and the expressed values, or the values that you actually show. And I feel like, again, that's something that we're collectively wrestling with. And I think how you behave is what your real values are, and what you say can be different. And so I think that it's, and we're all, like, this is at a human level as well, right? Yeah. There are a lot of values that I have, including waking up, early and going and exercising that don't happen in practice, but I would really value that. So, this is part of the human condition, right, of striving to be better. But I think as a city, it's always helpful to know that about yourself, right? Like, are you actually getting up at 6 o'clock in the morning? Are you actually always thinking about the macro impact? Are you thinking about what this does to the market? Are you thinking about how this impacts the most vulnerable people, the small businesses on Main Street? And so I think that practice of starting with your values is essential, and then thinking, like, how do you change all of your decisions so that they're aligned? I think it's like being a person on a daily basis. You have to wake up and say, what are my values and how do I live that? So I think that's the great challenge. You're like, I don't know what to do with that.
Well, no, actually, that's true. I guess I want to, the more I was reading and thinking about this, the more I started to puzzle about certain key terms for the work of development, beginning with, for example, development, which feels in a weird way like a euphemism. And so if you weren't saying development, in other words, it seems like it's not naming the values it puts at the center of the activity in a way. That could be wrong. It could be based on my ignorance of what it is. But so I think I want to ask, what is development? Is that a fair question? Is that too naive a question to, Greg, when you think development, which only partially fits, what is it?
Well, I mean, it's obviously got to serve a purpose for where people work or live or whatever, but to me it's a place where people want to be, and it complements the fabric. You should never look at a development on a block alone or whatever. You have to look at it as to how it integrates and how it makes an area better, because you should think of developments as catalytic, and so, but to me it's an environment that people want to be in, and now that you look at it, today, that's people want the 24/7 vitality. They don't want in the urban fabric. They're not as much into the resi here, the office here, the retail there. They want to be in the West End, the Pearl, some of these other places where you can walk, you don't take a car, you can Uber if you want, you might use, Easy Car to Go or whatever, Zip Car. That's what people want, and they don't want to have to go far for things, So
my definition would be that development is another way of saying growth, and it's growth that is that somebody makes happen. So it's right. It's catalyzed growth. It's maybe not just regular growth. I don't know the exact difference, but when I think of real estate development or economic development, I think of economic growth and activities that catalyze that.
And I think when I think of development, I think of environment influencing behavior. And so depending on what the development or community that you live in changes the way you perceive your neighbors, how you communicate with people, access to jobs, resources. And so that development can be good or it can be bad. And change isn't always bad or good. And so that's what I think of when I think of development.
But it seems like, and I think we even briefly mentioned this earlier, that change, whether good or bad, is always controversial. I mean,
it can be. A lot of times you're not doing something great if there's not a little, pushback on something. The examples I talked about earlier, Pioneer Courthouse Square, where you got rid of a surface parking lot, a 2-floor old Myron Frank surface parking lot to put Pioneer Square in, and a lot of people were really upset about it because where am I going to park? Well, the city built some other garages, but it was very controversial at the time.
So, in a way, I think I want to push even more there a little bit and just ask. So controversy is what you talked in your previous comment about, sort of what people want, and it's hard to, seems like people want different things. That's part of what's challenging. Which people, what do they want? How do we know what to credit of what they want? And I guess controversy is one kind of response to a decision or a move in this area. And I guess I want to ask about responsibility specifically. Like you talked about waking up early and going to the gym, which feels like a certain sense of accountability to a picture of yourself.
Yeah.
In this realm, like in the development realm, what do you feel responsible to, or who do you feel responsible to?
I mean, I guess I feel very responsible to the city. I feel very responsible to using public resources in the way that, but for those resources, this good would not happen. So I feel, I feel an enormous amount of responsibility. I feel like it's a privilege and an honor to be in the seat that I'm in and to be able to work with the people that I work with. And, we're trying to do things differently. We're trying to do new kinds of things, but I feel ultimately I'm responsible to everybody in this room.
I think, there's totally different hats that most people wear, depending on the circumstance they're in. And sometimes it's nice for me as a developer. I feel like I'm very environmentally conscious as a person and care about communities a lot. But then I have to think to myself, at the end of the day, a real estate developer's a money manager. That's what we do, if you want to just say it in the plain. We manage money by doing all these different things that we do. And so in the base way, a real estate developer is responsible to their investor. And that's kind of goes back to the idea of who's your investor. So that can kind of change depending on who that is. But in a personal way, obviously, I feel very responsible to the communities and thrive off of the idea when I see, people living in the buildings and they're creating community, and to be a catalyst for such activity, I think is the most exciting thing for me. And then as a person who cares a lot about design, I feel responsible for what goes up in the city. And I wish more people felt responsible for the things that they put up. So, so, it kind of falls in that level, but obviously if for my job title, if I can be responsible and make money for my investor while also doing all these other things, I think that's a win in my world.
Yeah. Greg, I guess I want to throw the same question your way. Like, does responsibility figure, and how?
Well, I think obviously you want to be responsible to the community. At the same time, and Anyeley said it, and I'll be a little harsher about the way I say it, if you look at most developers, they're not using their money. Maybe in some small developments, but you look at high-rise office buildings, they're not using their money. And so sometimes you'll say, well, why didn't they do this, this, and this to the building? Well, they couldn't get the return for the institutional investor to invest in the building, so they couldn't build the building for an XYZ company who wanted 150,000 feet. So dollars and cents are always important, because why the people sitting on this stage have a commitment to Portland, the institutional money doesn't say, boy, I just love Portland. They look at it and they've got a fund of $20 billion, and they're going to go anywhere in the world that they can get a decent return. They'll like Portland, they'll like visiting Portland, but they have to go sell that investment to a funding group within their company, and it gets down to analytics. They're not driving by and saying, I really love the Pine Street Market. I want to develop next door to Pine Street Market. That, unfortunately, isn't the way it works, so.
Which is one of the reasons why our company didn't take any institutional money until just very recently, when we said, okay, we think this is the right institutional partner for us versus many other opportunities we had to take institutional money.
And I think you look at, Eric Kress, and there's a great group of developers that the Beam Development, and I think most Portland developers have that kind of philosophy, but you also see a lot of national developers who are good people, but they don't have as much of that philosophy. And when they come into town, you say, look, the stuff that if you think you're going to do something cookie cutter that you did in Chicago and you're just going to plop it down, not going to happen in Portland. So you try to warn them. But yeah, I mean warn them in a positive way, because you don't want them to spin their wheels. And you know, they'll try to do cookie cutter stuff, you know. That's the business they're in. They have institutional money, they build something, they sell it, and they get a promote, okay? And that's how most developers work. But when you have the local people, which is harder and harder as we become a second tier from a third tier city and bordering on a 1- or an A- or something. But it gets harder. It gets harder to do because you have more outside money coming in and making demands.
So somehow that made me think about a lot of the shots in Ifanyi's film, which are these really beautiful overhead shots. And I guess while you were talking, it was making me think about what's the right place to be seeing Portland from? What's the right vantage point, the perspective? Where should we be looking at Portland from? Like what's the altitude? What's the vantage point from which we should be looking at this place as we catalyze its change?
I mean, I think it's always been from the street. Personally,
say?
the street.
Yeah, I agree.
The street. Yeah. I mean, that experience walking down the street, I mean, that's all you see as a pedestrian. And I think, you know, that's what makes actually, I mean, the small blocks, which are actually really hard in real estate development to deal with, is what actually makes Portland unique in the outcome of, you know, all the retail and the vitality, and it's the street.
Yeah. I agree, and the zoning code has changed to recognize the street more. In the old days, you know, you look at the South Auditorium districts where buildings are set back, they didn't have retail, it's almost suburban design. And once you do that, you can't, it is what it is. So the connectivity, you know, you look downtown, the old Hilton on Broadway, it's a solid wall. I mean, it's a fine building, but there's no connectivity from block to block. You walk in the Pearl, you walk on Alberta Street. Okay, that's a perfect example of connectivity and good planning and how people can just go from place to place and they go by foot, you know. So the street, definitely.
Yeah, I agree, and I think the street, you know, I think particularly given, you know, where we are, I think looking on 82nd, looking on 162nd, thinking about the streets that when you are in the kind of public imagination and you think of Portland, don't necessarily rise, but where we have such a significant portion of our population, particularly those who, you know, are more vulnerable, or there's a lot of children out there. I think it's really important to be thinking about the vantage of Portland from that perspective.
So I want to move us toward audience questions in just a minute, but I want to actually take a moment. So if people want to, there's a microphone here, and there will be a light there. Before getting there, I guess one last question, that is thinking 20 years forward. Thinking 20 years forward. Are there things that particularly stand out to you that you fear might happen? Or sort of huge opportunities that you think, yeah, would be great if this happened for Portland?
I think for me, it's really a lot of times the things that make neighborhoods and cities great get forgotten, and because of either nostalgia or I got mine, you can't get yours mentality. And I think I'll say it again, the urban growth boundary is what makes Portland and Oregon, those initial land use policies are what has made it the way it is. And 20 years from now, if that gets forgotten, it's going to be suburban South Florida, where I grew up. And that's not good for, you know, as far as infrastructure and resources and taking out all that to the fringes, and it's not going to be good for farmland or forest land. And what I feel like a lot of times is there's a lot of land in the city of Portland, and that land needs to be kind of unlocked. The value of that land needs to be unlocked, and the person that's usually not at this forum, which actually happens to be at this forum, is landowners. And it always bothers me, the idea that, they'd be like, developers, what are you gonna do? And city planners, how are you gonna plan? And it's like, if the landowner doesn't unlock their land, none of this is happening. And if the landowner doesn't unlock their land, then we're gonna say, oh, we don't have enough, buildable property, let's, go out to the fringes. And so I think that's my greatest fear when it comes to like land use and development. And then my second greatest fear, I guess, for 20 years from now is the idea that we don't work together, public sector and private sector, and understand that we both have the same goals. Not all of us, but there's a lot of us within those groups that have the same goals and want the same things out of our community, and I'm mainly referring to affordable housing, and that we actually find tools between the two of us that actually are market-driven but achieve public good. Because I feel like a lot of the things that are happening now are reactionary on the public side to promote public good, not realizing that as real estate developers in the market, we just follow the market. Like, if something's happening, we go away from that and do something else, and we just operate in that way, and stop, and for the public sector to kind of stop chasing that ball, and rather say, like, we have some things that we actually want in common because I live in this, we live here also. Let's find ways to work with the market to actually realize things like affordable housing. And so those are my kind of the two things is like the form of the city and then the people that actually can afford to live in the city.
Greg, what do you think when you look out 20 years, fears?
Well, I mean, my biggest fear is that we don't fix our education system, because we need to have a strong workforce, and most importantly, you're cheating children that can't fend for themselves by not providing them the best education. And when you graduate 72% of people from high school and wonder why there's a shrinking middle class, it's tough middle class period, but I always say there's very few walk-on brain surgeons. You usually have to have an education. And so we need to be teaching people vocational skills. We need to really focus on education, get our graduation rate. Tony Hobson's helped at Jefferson High School, and now they have an 80% graduation rate with SEI. We need to put more focus into that, because without that, all the planning, and I think Anyeley's right about the urban growth boundary and stuff like that, that's very, very important, but you need to be able to have a homegrown work base and good family values, so on and so forth. Your chances of success is just like you were saying earlier, the people that they had the bachelor's degrees and the graduate degrees. Yeah, I mean, that's no surprise, that they're doing better. So we need to ramp up our high school graduation rate, provide vocational schools, and reform our education. And then I think we'll be best served for the long-term best interests of our community.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I agree with both of those. I think the fear from my perspective is that we become like a San Francisco, or become a city where there really is just very the very low income and very high income people. And I worry that sometimes we learn the wrong lessons from San Francisco. The lesson isn't just that they had, they had some important tools, but they also really clamped down on growth. And so I do worry about that. But I'm also optimistic. So you asked about a fear and a hope. We have a lot of the tools in our toolkit. I think there's a lot of smart and dedicated people, and I think that we can collectively, I think we can do it differently, but we really have to show our values and show up in a way that actually lives into that.
Thank you. So here's what I want to do. I want to have us go to questions, and as we go, first, maybe a big thanks again, a quick first thanks to Anyeley, Greg, and Kimberly for getting us started. So thank you for... And then just a request with questions. This probably doesn't need to be said, but if you could maybe say your name and sort of keep them short and interrogative, that'd be great. Perfect. Thanks.
Thank you. Anthony Petchel, I work for a nonprofit developer of Reach Community Development. We build affordable housing, so I appreciate all of the talk about housing and the need. My question is about putting values into action, and Anyeley, you brought up the example of trying to build affordable housing, and then the policies at the kind of the city level prevented that. So now we have kind of the exact opposite situation where we have inclusionary zoning as a citywide policy. And we've heard a lot from the development community that that's going to completely kill development. So I'd love to hear all of your thoughts on when we actually take our values and put that into policy, how do we kind of grapple with those two things? So inclusionary zoning.
Yeah, I mean, I think there's values and then there's execution of values is sort of what you said. And I think the idea that the values, right, is kind of what I was saying as far as the public sector and many in the private sector have the same value. The question is, do each believe each other when they talk to each other? And I know that there are a lot of developers who were saying, this is what's going to happen, and let me show you an actual model, and then scrub our models, look at it, and everything. Yet they weren't, I wasn't a part of that process. They weren't believed or heard. And that is mainly the rhetoric with developers. Oh, developers always asking for less this, less that. And I'm, that's when I'm getting more to my developer side, where I'm like, why don't they just listen? And then I came to the point at one point where I was like, nobody should be talking to real estate developers. They should be talking to the bankers. Go and ask, the guy that funds our project, hey, if we do this, this, and this policy, what would you do? Because at the end of the day, like I said, it's really dependent on the money. So if there is a policy that gets the dollars flowing scared, let's call that, that will go to Hillsborough. That will go, forget Oregon, maybe let's go to Texas now. So money is, I think people don't realize how floating money is. It's not tied to location. And so I feel like people should listen to developers in that case. And yeah, with what, everybody rushed to get their permits in before the inclusionary housing passed, and like everyone knew in our side, everyone knew they was going to do that, and then everybody knew on our side that it was going to fall after that because the money would be, it's kind of risky environment. So how can we get to that same result without seeing it after the fact and not believing that that was going to happen?
Because we have a lot of questions, you're going to have to really jump in response, or I'm going to go to the next one. So Greg, you're about to jump in.
Inclusionary zoning's all right if there's offsets for it. In this case, there wasn't offsets. In this case, they didn't believe that the new performers were real. I don't want to say didn't believe. They didn't take them for granted. I think there was a certain distrust of developers. Then we showed them actual performers on existing projects. And so and I think it was candidly, I think it was predetermined it was going to pass. And I think that I think it was for the intent of the good that it did pass, but I think they're going to be revisiting in a couple years, because if you look at the costs associated with inclusionary zoning, they're getting rid of the residential bonus, the residential FAR bonus. They put a 1% construction excise tax on, and just markets in general, that there's no doubt there's going to be a significant drop-off in supply. Personally, I think it's and then if you look, frankly, I know people talk about the housing emergency, and I think that, the bond measure that passed was good. But, they still charge $17,000 per unit in system development fees and so on. If there's an emergency, if there's a housing emergency, the city's own policies should reflect and sacrifice certain things, like some of the SDC fees that aren't being sacrificed. So time will tell. I hope I'm wrong. I think the whole inclusionary zoning concept is a Band-Aid, even if it works. I think you need to be looking at something like a statewide real estate transfer tax. You need to raise some real money. There's not that many development sites to build and have 10 or 20% of those units turn into affordable housing, even if it works. That you're not, you need to raise hundreds of millions of dollars. And if you had a real estate transfer tax, something like that, that might help.
I think that, so I completely agree that we need more capital to help make affordable housing real. Inclusionary housing does, there are some offsets, for if it's above 5-to-1 FAR, there are no property taxes for 10 years. I think a question is whether it's the right level of incentive, and I appreciate that that's an ongoing conversation. But I do think that the public officials who were involved in this, and the Portland Development Commission doesn't do affordable housing, so this was a conversation we were only peripherally involved in. But I think they were trying to take the long view and say, yes, it might not work today, but the land values will probably depreciate, and there are winners and losers with that, but that it might work over the long term. I think everybody agrees that it needs to be retuned over time, and I don't think that it is a silver bullet solution, but I do think it is. I do believe that it is consistent with living into our values, and the asterisk being one of the values needs to be, continuing to grow. And so I think, going back 2 years from now, 4 years from now, the next business cycle, and saying, did it actually, did the value of the land change? Are we seeing more development is really important.
Just real quick. Well, it's interesting. First of all, there's a 10-year tax abatement. There's a 99-year commitment to the affordable housing. Yeah. So you have to have a reduced rate for 99 years, although you get a 10-year tax abatement. The old program was 10 years for 10 years. So that's changed. That has changed significantly, So I just, and land in Portland is a very small percentage of a high-rise development. If you look at land in San Francisco, you look at land in, obviously I don't want to compare us to New York or in any way, but in Seattle or something, we're a small, land is going to go to its highest and best use. So if you have land and you can make more by developing the land, you will develop the land. It's one thing if it's a green field, but there's very few green fields where people are getting no income in the central city. Mm-hmm. So it's a risk-reward deal. But I think the most important thing is in a couple years, hopefully it works, but if it doesn't, that they make changes to get it to work.
Thank you.
My name is Angela Majumdar. I am currently unemployed, but I want to throw out a couple of questions and then just whoever wants to grab something, because there's a lot of components rather than giving like 5 parts. But basically, I really think that organizing on a community like bonding level is really a way to address a lot of the issues underlying. And I think developers get a horrible rap, sometimes earned and sometimes not, because they come in and they do their thing and they're seen as greedy and not actually trying to help the community. And I think a lot of that could be addressed with like roundtables and including the community that exists there to try to get buy-in or at least information out. And that would help with people feeling alienated from their own communities. And then also another thing is, in terms of micro level, like me and my friend, like we're here for book club and it's open to the public and we read a book and we do an activity. And so we read Evicted, the Portland Reads, and we're here. And anyone's welcome to join, it's on Facebook. Book club with activities. But anyway, but the point is like it's tiny, right? But like if I could have my way, it would be giant, but there's not a lot of places to have those discussions. So is there anything from the macro level where people can get together and just meet each other? Because really I think empathy is what drives people actually trying to get each other. And I think that if you live paycheck to paycheck, it's terrifying, everything is. And I think that in terms of humanism and utilitarianism, I would like to give more money for taxes. Like we need better education, and if people come in with money and privilege and they send their kids to charter schools or private education to give their kids a good education, it's selfish, but it's understandable if the education doesn't meet the requirement. But that just continues to divide everything. And so like if you actually have people who have money, it's almost like tithings or something.
So if you could just, I'm sorry, just with a line, if you could.
Sure.
Yeah.
So I guess, is there any way that you guys have thought about or developed, or is there anything in the works to kind of try to help with these issues?
Yeah, so PDC, well, there's a lot of institutions, neighborhood associations, business district associations, churches, and there's a lot of different things. One of the things that PDC did about 5 years ago was to create a series of what we call neighborhood prosperity initiative districts. And the idea there was to really help create community-led, community-driven economic development, and to do so on 82nd with the Jade District and 162nd with Rosewood Initiative and other places. And I think that having a common purpose and creating a vision together and then being empowered and resourced to deliver on that can be really galvanizing and create long-term connections to where you live, but also to one another. So that's one thing that I think we should continue.
I think I'm going to go so we can get some more questions in. Yeah.
I hope this question isn't too similar to hers. My name is Donovan Smith. My question essentially is based on what you guys were saying about the street level. I took that as meaning that you wanted to be a part of the community. On average, I don't know where any of these buildings come from when Portland is developing. And I don't know any of you guys. And on average, I don't know any developers. So so what are you guys doing, or how much is community a part of how you formulate your developments before you create on a plot of land? Yeah, that's it.
Thanks.
You want me to take that one?
Yeah. I mean, community plays a big role on what we decide to do on a particular property, and we've decided to pass on many properties because we thought maybe the existing building was fine with the existing tenants in it, and we didn't want to be a part of the idea of kicking them out, knowing full well the developer after us was coming to do that, just like that's not what we want to be a part of. And so, I mean, for us, a lot of times what we try to do, we're a small developer, so we can't really get too mired in controversy in a way. So we try to foresee, obviously we go to neighborhood associations and we talk beforehand, which some developers don't do, but we try to foresee what we think would be a good outcome, the design-wise, programmatic-wise. And so it's been very helpful for us because it's allowed us to, sometimes I say slip under the radar in the sense of a building appears and everybody's like, oh, that was great. And that is a little bit of our mode to reduce risk and also to be responsive to the community. So that's on a project level. I mean, on a personal level, I'm involved with community activities that, aid affordable housing or think about economic development for the African American community. So that's on a personal level. But I think just being responsive to, observing the neighborhood in which you're building and what you're putting there is important.
And I think I just want to make a quick plug for, in not too many minutes, this building can be a place to talk across some of these differences because there are some developers in our midst. And grab the chance, for real. There are probably more than we know. Did one of you want to jump in on Donovan's question?
That's good.
Hi, my name is Alice Shapiro, and I am privileged to live in the neighborhood of Selwood Moreland. If Adam said he was naive, I feel way more naive. But my question is asking, what do you consider the difference between development and gentrification? And how do you address the issues of when you develop a neighborhood, you do not displace the current residents? I mean, that's happened in the Alberta Arts District. It's happening all over. How do we address that? How do we have a voice for the voiceless, a home for the homeless, and stop evicting people when they have no place to go? So
PDC has a history, we've been around for almost 60 years, and the beginning of that history, development and gentrification were in some ways synonymous. We went into what became the South Auditorium District and basically, removed a neighborhood that was basically an immigrant neighborhood. We went into the Albino District and expanded Legacy Emmanuel and had, huge negative impacts within the African American community. So, I sit here today very cognizant of the fact that we have not historically gotten this right. I think it is I think it is challenging. You look across the city, across the country, there are very few places where you've seen significant development without gentrification and without displacement. So I don't know that there are easy solutions. I do think thinking towards the long term, so within Lentz Town Center, 92nd, and Foster, PDC, and the Housing Bureau just did a major investment. We put in about $54 million into 4 projects, $104 million for the total project. So we were about 50% of the financing, and we put in a lot of affordable housing and affordable commercial, because we feel like even though today the market rents are affordable, 10 years from now, we don't anticipate that they will be. And that was a hard conversation with community partners, because people there have been asking for market rate housing for a long time, feeling like they have a lot of affordable housing. But I think anticipating change from the beginning is one way to really be mindful of how do you do development without displacing long-term residents.
Any other bites on the alignment or difference between development and gentrification?
I think my view maybe is a little changed over time. At the beginning, gentrification was just like negative things that happen in communities. I think more so recently, I think reading a lot about it and obviously being in the profession, I realize it as natural change that happens in every neighborhood throughout time in history. If you look throughout history, people were all, Central Park was built on a whole neighborhood that was cleared out for Central Park. And so just understanding it, unfortunately, as natural processes in economic and how things work, and like you said, understanding that. Now when you understand that, what can we do to help? I mean, in a way, gentrification really helps certain people, right? Their land values go up, they sell, they make a lot of money. So it helps certain people, and it really hurts a whole other set of people. So understanding that, and then trying to find ways in which, when change happens, it helps everybody, most especially, obviously, the people that were in the neighborhood before, and just foreseeing those things that naturally will happen with rising property taxes. And so I commend you. I don't know the details of the Lentz project, but the idea that, wait a minute, this is going to happen once we start doing this investment, and thinking about the future, I think is very important to make sure that everyone benefits from that.
I agree with both of them. I think ideally, if you could come up with a good program for successful, affordable home ownership instead of rental, because it's very difficult. Most people retire on the appreciation of their home. Okay, if you own a home for 30 years, it's probably going to go up 400% or 500% and be a good nest egg, and you pay it off over 20 or refinance or whatever. But you need to find a way. The affordable housing is great, and it's great to be in a tax increment district. You see what PDC's done at South Waterfront and built a huge number of affordable units, and there's more coming, and that's great. But you need to find a way to be able to give people, those same people, an opportunity to own, so they can build some equity.
That's really important.
And sorry to make another comment, but there's a lot of people involved in Mercy Corps being one of them, with the idea of having trust or REITs that allow people in the community to invest in the commercial development of their community also. And I'm involved with an effort called the Soul District, which is trying to think of some of those things in relation to the African American community. Unfortunately, like a lot of these things are too late. Not that they can't make a difference now, but it's like, imagine if we thought about these things during the recession.
Hi, thanks for your time. Greta Osman, I'm an Oregon real estate broker, so I relate to everything that you're saying. And I'm happy to hear about the Lentz project being mentioned, because it seems that most of the development conversation is about Central City, but most of the city is in East Portland. And so what's your vision for East Portland? I hope Lentz is the tip of the iceberg, a really big iceberg.
So I guess what I would say is I think that the East Portland, I think of it as EPAP, East Portland Action Plan, which was a long-term effort that really created a vision for how East Portland would grow. I think that is the vision that we support. My perspective on this is that it's important for the community, supported by the public sector, to define what that vision is. And so I think the Lentz investments, our work in Gateway, our work in the NPIs is meant to support that. But I think there will be a lot more development in East Portland, and sorry.
I kind of want to.
I'm getting the cue.
Well,
Hi.
I'd just like to get quickly these last couple of questions, and
All right.
then leave some informal time too. So yeah.
Okay. Hi, my name is Jessica. I'm a director of a local nonprofits arts organization here in Portland, and I went to Design Week Portland last year and to listen to a lot of developers speak about growth in Portland, and a lot of them were saying, we're looking to East Portland and 182nd because that's where the artists are moving. So, Greg, one of the first things you said that kicked off this conversation was that Portland is a city that supports creativity. So, what I'm wondering with the reality that 9 art spaces closed in 2016 alone in Portland, how are developers in Portland thinking about supporting arts rather than looking to them to define the next area to be developed?
Well, that's a good question. On a family level, we have a long history of supporting Northwest and Portland artists. So, unfortunately, somebody should verify this. They should probably verify everything I say. But there used to be a 1% bonus for art. When you build a building, if you wanted an FAR bonus, one of the options was 1% for art. And candidly, a lot of people haven't been using that lately, but I believe it's being eliminated by the city of Portland as not an option. They're focused, in fairness, they're focused on the affordable housing and historic buildings. So, which is unfortunate for the arts community. But, I think, I work a lot with Girding Edlin and Melvin Mark, and the list goes on, of local people and developers, and Tom Cody and your group, they are very conscious of local stuff, and not just in the trades but in art. And I think when you walk into one of their buildings, you're going to see local art on it as opposed to Northwest, or as opposed to national art.
Yeah. And one of the buildings I was referring to that we didn't look into buying was filled with artist spaces. And my sister and my brother-in-law are artists, and I was like, just can't do it, even though knowing that I think they're probably already all kicked out. It'd be great to find a business model. I mean, we have to, as a commercial real estate developer, you got to find a business model, something that makes money, something that works. I remember thinking, all these people getting kicked out, there's got to be a model where somehow you mix this and that, and it's going to work. Those take time to develop, and then, you have to kind of match it. Do you have the time? So it's like one of those things, but it's definitely in the back of my mind. And I think like someone like Kevin Kavanaugh would be like a perfect person who probably is thinking about this right now. It's just hard, when it doesn't immediately pencil. It takes more time to figure that stuff out.
So I want to actually make this the last question, and then I want to encourage the other folks in line to try to keep talking during the informal time after. I apologize for that, but just want to be mindful of everyone's time. Yeah. Thank you.
Dale Bernards, Canterbury Commercial Real Estate. My question is we've done a lot of activity on the south waterfront. However, the active space, which was required by the city, remains vacant for years on end. How do we take care of that issue? Because it doesn't present a nice environment for the south waterfront.
Which space?
Can you name the space one more time?
The general area in the south waterfront, there's a lot of vacancy on the ground floor because of the requirement for active space. And some of that actually has been now converted to residential area because there isn't a commercial demand. But yet when you're showing property down that area, there's no active space.
Yeah, I knew, I was aware that during the recession there was a challenge in tenanting it. I guess I wasn't aware that that was still a challenge. So, I know that there's been some new activity, and I think I'm hopeful that with the plan that the Zidels have, that you'll see increased investment, and that density and having that many people will help support retail. So I appreciate that it's a challenge, but maybe it's an opportunity for an artist space.
Yay.
I think there's a bit of, and Kimberly knows her business, I don't, but a chicken and an egg down at South Waterfront. And one of the things, if I was king or queen of PDC, I'd be looking at saying, I think getting a grocery store in down there would be very, very catalytic to it, drive a lot of energy down there. The retail would thrive. And right now, the grocery community is saying it doesn't make sense for them to do it. But I think if PDC can figure out a way to help subsidize something based on them getting a return on the investment, it shouldn't just be a grant, but if the grocery store does well over a period of time, PDC gets its money back. And I think that would be a catalytic to it help the Zidels and so on. I think grocery stores, if you could put one thing, when we did the West End, real quick, we had and that was an area when, and we and other people, including Anyeley and Tom Cody and so on, but we had the benefit of having Whole Foods right across the street in the Pearl, and everybody goes, well, will anybody go south of Burnside? Well, they did. Okay, but the grocery store, if I can pick one thing to help a neighborhood, is putting a grocery store in that neighborhood.
So I think what I'd like to do is I want to encourage us to shift off of the lights here. Before doing that, I want to say just a couple of quick things. First, I want to thank Ifeanyi again for the work on Future Portland, page 2. Second, I just want to note that the word catalytic and catalyze has shown up repeatedly tonight, and that was actually not a joke. That was a sincere comment, and I mean it. And I want to thank you, the three of you, for being willing to come up here and catalyze a lot of thinking and a lot of work in the city. So
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you
Thanks
for
for the
having us.
opportunity.
So we have this space for a good 45 minutes now, and there's small food, and there's drinks you can get, and I hope you will talk to people you don't know and keep exploring some of the thoughts here. I hope you'll join us again for future Think and Drinks and Conversation projects. Thanks very much for coming out tonight.